So wanted to just welcome everyone to this week's session. And what we're going to talk about today is preventing the capture of noise during production. Last week we talked about how to measure noise and determine whether or not there's so much noise in your recording that you need to do some sort of post-processing and actually reduce some of that noise. This week what I'm hoping to cover is how to prevent some of the ambient noise from actually making it into your recording in the first place. And there are times when you want to do that, times when you may not necessarily want to do that. You do want to capture some of that ambient noise. So we'll talk about that. But before we do that, we do have a question from our friend Art Johnson. And let me just share my screen here really quickly so you can see that. All right. Art Johnson submitted this question ahead of time over on the Google Plus page. And likewise, if any of you are interested ever in shooting a question out there that we can discuss on these help sessions, go ahead and do that over on the Google Plus page. It's just associated with the session right here that we're doing right now. Art asks, hi Curtis, I'm currently creating videos for YouTube by directly recording through webcam and external condenser mic connected via USB, so some sort of USB microphone. Can I improve audio by using a different mic with XLR and using my Zoom H5n as an audio interface? For example, you have a mic that's connected to the H5 via XLR, and then from the H5, you're connected to your MacBook Pro via USB. And that is another alternative, of course, is just recording into your Zoom H5. And then once you've recorded that to SD card in the Zoom, take the SD card out and then feed the audio to your MacBook Pro to sync it up to your video or screencast or whatever you're doing. So those are a couple different options. Let's talk about that question just a little bit. So there are a few things here, Art, and I think it really kind of depends. Here's the short answer. The short answer is yes, it can help, but it won't necessarily help because it really depends on what you're starting with and how that compares to what you'd be moving to here. So for example, I have a Audio-Technica AT2005. It's a USB microphone, but it also has an XLR output. So you can connect that microphone to your computer directly via USB, or you can take the XLR output from that microphone, put it into an audio interface, and then your audio interface would connect to your computer. Or you could take that XLR out from the microphone and feed it into an audio recorder like a Zoom H5. So there are lots of different options there. And let me tell you my experience with that particular mic, because I think it kind of may hopefully shed a little bit of light on what you're asking about here. That is, the Zoom H5 has pretty good preamplifiers and a pretty good analog to digital converter. So when you record into that, depending on what mic you have hooked up to it, you can actually make some pretty good recordings. And I've been pretty impressed with it. I haven't used the H5 a whole lot, but it does appear to have very similar preamplifiers and analog to digital converter as the Zoom H6, and that was actually quite good. So both in terms of noise performance, in terms of the overall sound, my impression with the Zoom recorders is they generally sound just a little bit warmer than most of the Tascam recorders, like they're imparting a little bit of extra, just a tiny bit, a little bit more low-end sort of warmth to them. But again, they can sound really great. So if I were to take my Audio-Technica AT2005, I always get those numbers mixed up, but if I were to take that and connect it to my computer via USB, what happens in those circumstances is that the microphone captures the audio, it sends the analog signal to an analog to digital converter within the microphone that makes it into ones and zeros, a digital signal, and then sends that to the computer via its USB cable. So in that case, you're relying on both the preamplifier and the analog to digital converter that's built into the microphone. And to be honest, that microphone cost me, I think I spent $50 US on it. So it's a relatively affordable microphone. So when Audio-Technica made that microphone, they had to kind of skimp somewhere. And my impression is where they skimped was on that preamplifier potentially, and possibly also its analog to digital converter. So they're not the greatest quality on that front. However, the microphone itself is actually quite good. So when I connect that same microphone up to an audio interface, say for example my Focusrite Sapphire Pro 24 via XLR cable, the sound is actually significantly different. Like if I put headphones on, or even if I don't put headphones up, I just listen on, decent monitors or speakers, I can hear a different. It doesn't sound as tinny. It has a little bit more low-end warmth, and it sounds more balanced overall. So there definitely is a difference in that particular case. Now, what we don't know, Art, from your question here is what microphone you're currently using, and to know whether or not that would actually be better or worse than the Zoom H5n. But I would recommend just doing some tests there. If you've already got the Zoom and you've already got the microphone, well, your microphone may or may not have an XLR output. So you'd have to do some experiments. But if you have the details on what you're using, perhaps some of us have, maybe me or someone else in the audience here has used those before and may be able to provide an opinion on that. But I think it's a really good question. And I think it's a question worth asking for your particular production, whatever it may be that you're doing. There may be cases where using an audio interface or a recorder that also acts as an audio interface, like the Zoom H5. It's actually, I don't think there's an H5n, I think it's just the H5 so far, but that actually can produce a better sound overall. I would recommend just go ahead and use it as an audio interface. I don't think there's any advantage to recording and syncing later necessarily in that case, just more work. Because the Zoom H5 has already done the preamplification, it's already done the analog to digital conversion. So either way you do it, whether it's going straight to your computer or going to SD card. So I hope that was helpful, Art. I hope that answers your question, and thanks for asking it. That was a good one. And I appreciate you submitting that up ahead of time. All right, let's come back here. Okay, so again, I apologize everyone. I did have some issues early on where we were muted. So I'll probably pull this video and hopefully cut that first section off. All right, let's talk a little bit more about noise and how to prevent noise. Now, first of all, whether or not you should prevent noise is the first question we need to ask ourselves. If you want the voice of your talent to sound like it's in a studio, if you want it to be very clean and essentially nothing but the voice itself, those are cases where you are probably going to want to spend a little bit of time looking at ways you can prevent that noise in the first place from getting into your recording. And there are a number of things you can do. However, I just wanted to kind of present the idea and the possibility to you that you don't always necessarily want to remove all of that ambient sound. And in some cases, it isn't noise so much as it is part of the program that you want to capture. So that's important to keep in mind. In documentaries, often they won't go to great lengths necessarily to eliminate all of the ambient sound because you're trying to capture reality. You're trying to capture what's really happening. Now, you probably don't want a situation where the ambient sound is so distracting that it takes the people out of the story or out of whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, obviously. But there are times when it's not necessary to make it sound like your talent are in a studio necessarily. So that's one thing to keep in mind. All that aside, what can you do? Well, I think the first thing really is room choice. The biggest things that can add noise when you're capturing audio, of course, air conditioners and heaters. So HVAC systems can, if there's any sort of air blowing, that can create noise. Now, one thing you can do there during production to help prevent some of that noise is use a high-pass filter if you have one on your microphone or your recorder. And what a high-pass filter does is it essentially just attenuates the lowest frequencies. And that blowing air often is recorded as a very low frequency. So using that low-cut filter may remove some of the bass from your talent's voice a little bit, depending on the microphone or the recorder, but it will also eliminate a lot of that hiss or that hum or whatever it gets recorded as from the air conditioner or the heating system. So that's one thing you can do, and actually a pretty good strategy when you're in those circumstances. The only problem with that is that, excuse me, once you've made that switch, if you've moved the switch on your microphone to do that during the recording, you're committed. That gets into the recording, so it's that way from then on. You could also, in post, add a high-pass filter and accomplish the same thing. So it's kind of a trade-off. I think, so anyway, that's just a consideration. You might want to experiment with that to see if that helps in your particular situation. Another thing to consider is choosing your room, as we mentioned before. Now, the problem is in a lot of places where we live and work, indoors at least, there's lots of ambient noise. And it isn't always apparent to us. I think in a lot of ways, our brains are very good at filtering that out. So our ears are always capturing all of this ambient noise. And that comes in the form of, again, things in the room that are making noise or making sound. And also it comes from the voice itself as it reflects and moves around the room. That's also another factor in that. So, a lot of times you will hear audio engineers talk about you're hearing a lot of room in that recording, or something along those lines. And what that refers to is that the voice is actually reflecting off the walls. I mean, typically it's when you have a lot of hard surfaces. So you'll have blank walls or walls without a lot on them, maybe nothing just but artwork. You may have hard floors, and obviously you often will have hard ceilings in household environments in particular, where they're not any sort of acoustic treatment. Carpeting can help reduce that because it's not as hard of a surface. So those are all things to consider. Now, the best thing, what I like to do is if I'm on location, if I'm working, for example, on one of my corporate videos, if I get a choice, and I don't always get a choice, but if I do get a choice and we can choose a room, while I'm going around and scouting throughout the office building for a particular room to use, I'm also doing an evaluation of the audio response in that room. So, for example, I did a piece just a couple months ago, and we had a choice of a variety of different rooms. And most office rooms are going to be square or rectangular. But we also had a choice of a room that was actually in the kind of it was on a corner of a building, but it wasn't a 90-degree corner. It was sort of an angle like that. And so the office was this kind of unique shape. That actually helps in some ways because square rooms tend to be the worst in terms of how they reflect sound. It sounds worse generally. But this room had that. It was also a little bit more open, so it was a bigger space. But it had that unusual shape to it, and it was carpeted. And actually, the audio response in that room worked a little bit better than most rectangular rooms would. So, and then in terms of visuals for the video itself, it worked just as well as any of the other offices. And so we actually got to select that room, and that helped a lot in terms of the audio overall. So when you're scouting, that is one thing to keep in mind. Obviously most of us are also doing the visual part of things, so we have to consider the visuals. But if you can also take into account the sound, and just do a test. If you want to just walk around the room and clap, you can hear how much reflection there is, and that'll give you a sense for how well or not well that room is going to work. And so that's one thing. It's certainly, if you can take into account, if you can choose your room, you can solve a lot of problems or prevent a lot of problems in the first place by choosing a room that's going to be less reflective and have fewer of that interference and strange reverb and things of that nature. So that's one thing. The other thing is sound blankets. I've talked about this before, and let me just show you the sound blankets I ended up using. And I haven't done a review of these. And to be honest, I'm a little bit hesitant to necessarily recommend these, but let me show you what I'm using today. Share that, okay. Come back over to our browser here. This is a website called Vocal Booth to Go. And they have these acoustic blankets. They are black on one side, white on the other. They are made out of recycled cotton fiber on the inside of the blanket. And then the exterior shell, the fabric on the outside, is a mix of cotton and some sort of probably polyester or something along those lines. So those blankets actually work reasonably well. And in fact, I don't know where exactly. They actually had cited a noise reduction coefficient, an NRC rating. They actually sent it to a lab where they measured the NRC rating, and the overall NRC was somewhere in the 0.7 or 0.8 range. 1.0 is, in theory, the perfect score, but in practice, you can actually get scores higher than that. But in any case, they actually went to the trouble of actually sending it to a lab and getting a noise reduction coefficient measurement on it. So it actually does help. I can tell you from a practical point of view, I've started using these a lot more in my productions, and it helps tremendously, even if you can only hang one of them. Now, they do also come, you can get them with grommets. Grommets are the little metal, let's see if we can find one here. Here we go, yeah. Grommets are these. It's a kind of a fuzzy picture. See if we can get a better one. Yeah, here we go. Grommets are these little metal circles that they insert at the top of the blanket that allow you to hang them. So you could put hooks on the ceiling if you wanted to. Obviously, if you're on location, that's not going to be realistic. But what I do is when I'm on location, I'll bring some of those with me. You can always just throw one on the floor, and that can help some. But ideally, what you want to do is hang it in front of the blank walls, the walls that are most likely to reflect. And so what I'll typically do is I'll have a couple of Sentry stands with I can just use the boom arms on that and suspend the blanket across those boom arms. And let me just show you what I mean there. If you're not familiar with this, we'll go to B&H and Sentry stand. There we go. All right, so Sentry stand. This is a Sentry stand if you weren't familiar with that. And it comes with, this particular one comes with a boom arm. And you can actually just extend that boom arm out horizontally, just like this. And then I kind of use one on either side, and then I hang the blanket from the horizontal boom arm. I also have some of those set up in my little home studio, and I use home studio in air quotes. But I also, in that case, I actually bought a much less expensive way to do this is to hang it from the ceiling. If you go to your hardware store, there is electrical conduit, which is essentially a metal pipe, relatively small diameter. So I think you can get it in maybe 3 centimeter diameter and maybe up to 5 centimeter diameter. But you can buy those, and they're relatively inexpensive. In US dollars, we're talking for a 10-foot piece of that, 10-foot pipe, somewhere in the $3 to $5 range. So it's very affordable. And then just buy some hooks that you can attach to your ceiling. And then you can suspend one of the sound blankets from that. So that's what I've been doing. And actually, it does a nice job of reducing the amount of reflection within a room. And you get a much, much better sound when you do that. Now, this is not necessarily the best choice. And this is, I'm thinking about this now because I'm actually working on my audio post-production course right now. And treating mixing rooms with these helps manage the higher frequency reflections that you get in a room, but it doesn't do a whole lot for absorbing bass frequencies. So it's it's not necessarily something you would want to use exclusively for a mixing room, like if the room where you're actually doing your audio post-processing. But in rooms where you are recording, it can make a huge, huge difference. So anyway, that's the kind of the background on that. Now, one thing I will tell you as well, you have a couple different choices here. Oh, before I go on, let me just tell you something about this. You can choose all black blankets, which are nice. Again, if you're trying to make, if you're going to hang something on a set, you want something where you can control the light still, because there's a big surface here, and you could actually affect the light that is supposed to be on your talent. It could start reflecting. So I got the blankets that are black on one side and white on the other. And the nice thing about that is it gives me options so that when I hang it up, if I don't want it to reflect any light, I'll hang the black side toward the set. But if I do want it to reflect some light, I can hang the white side. And that's actually, now it becomes not just a sound tool, now it's also a lighting tool. So I would recommend, if you are going to buy these, that you get the kind that they're a little bit more expensive, but they have white on one side and black on the other. Just something to consider there. There's one big downside of these blankets, and this is why I haven't necessarily recommended them yet. When I received them, I ordered a kit of 6 of them, and 6 was probably overkill for most of my jobs. And in fact, I think if even if you just bring 1 or 2, well, probably 2, maybe 3 of them with you, you can do a lot to tame a room to make it sound much, much better. And you can also hang them up so that the HVAC, the little register where the air comes out is behind the blanket. That will help to reduce some of that noise as well. It will also help manage a lot of the reflections. But anyway, so having 2 or 3 of them is always helpful. The big downside with these is that when I received them, they smelled horrible. They had this sort of chemical petroleum smell to them. And I don't know if that was fire retardant that had been applied to the blankets themselves, or if it was something else. But it was an awful smell, and it was to the point where I didn't feel like I could put those in a small room without affecting me or my or the talent that I was trying to shoot. They smelled that bad. Like I ended up getting it felt like I was getting a sore throat within a few minutes of having them in the same room. They were that bad. So I had to wash them a lot of times. You have to use a lot of detergent. I also put vinegar in there and baking soda in the washing machine. And before I got the blanket to a point where I felt like it was reasonable, like it was usable, I had to wash it 3 times, plus hang it out on outside on a drying line for a couple of days. So that's kind of the big downside. Now, some people have said they haven't had any problems with that. Other people have also conveyed the same concerns, that they smelled horrible when they first got them. So just be aware of that if you do decide to go this route. There are other companies that have kind of cropped up since then. As I was doing my search here, there's this company, and I haven't used them before, but it's Acoustical Solutions. And they have some sound blankets as well. I have no idea. I don't think you want the silicone treated. I don't know why you would do that. It says for high temp. Interesting. But you would want the either exterior or the interior one for absorbing sound. So there are some other options out there as well. I have no idea, again, how these stack up relative to the ones that I bought. But there you go. There's another option for you. And doing a search, you could probably find others as well. So definitely some things to learn there. And as much of a pain as it is to have to haul around that stuff, they're very heavy blankets, by the way, as far as blankets go. But they do make a huge difference in terms of the quality of your recording. You'll manage that reverb and that echo so much by hanging those up. And even if you can only hang it in front of one wall, that can make a huge difference. So I guess that's sort of the takeaway message here. I would recommend that as you kind of build up your kit, and I realize, all of us, including myself, don't have all the money in the world to go buying microphones, buying recorders, so on and so forth, and then also buying sound blankets and so on and so forth. But at some point, it is a worthwhile investment if you're going to be doing this on a regular basis. And if you have a permanent installation, if you're just shooting for, some sort of YouTube videos or something along those lines, or in some sort of set studio location, they're definitely a good investment. So those are some things to think about. I think we're nearing out of time at this point. So let me just do a double check here and see if we've got any other questions over on the Google Plus website. I have to refresh that. We'll come over here into the session. All right, that's the only question we had, was from Art. Art, again, thank you for sending that question in. We appreciate that. And again, I'd encourage any of the others of you that have questions, go ahead and submit them. When I send out every Sunday, I'll set up the help session for the coming week over on my Google Plus page, Curtis Judd Audio. And at that point, if you have questions, by all means, leave a comment there. We'll address that in the upcoming session. Also, if you are enrolled in the course, by all means, contact me via email anytime if you've got questions. I'd love to hear from you, and love to help work with you through any sort of recording issues that you're up against. Hopefully, we can find a good solution that works for you. Just a status update on the post-production course. I have started that. I have recorded 3 sessions or 3 segments of it so far, and I've done the planning for most of it. So I'm in the process of doing that. I had hoped to have that done by the end of the year, but it just didn't happen with all my other responsibilities and the work that I have to do to pay the bills. So we didn't quite finish that in time, but it is underway. Just wanted to let you know about that. So it'll probably be a 20-segment session course. And we've recorded 3 of them so far, so we've got a little bit of a pace going. I'll probably slow down the YouTube videos a little bit. I'll probably stick to 1 a week out on the YouTube channel. And then we will spend the rest of the week working on the course material when I'm not doing my regular day job. And let's see. So that's a status update on the course, the post-production audio course. It's going to be very focused on dialogue. So it's not a general post-production course, but specifically for dialogue. And then also coming up on the YouTube channel, a couple of things that may be of interest to you. This week's episode, I'm kind of wrapping up. Hopefully I'll get that out tonight or tomorrow night. And that one's actually not sound related, not directly sound related. That is a review of the Aperture VS2 Fine HD 7-inch monitor. So it's a monitor you attach to your camera, makes it so much easier to shoot. You can do so many things so much quicker. Focusing, you can nail it every single time. Exposure, you can nail it every single time because it's got some tools in there that make it really easy. And it's a lot less expensive than something like an Atomos Shogun recorder monitor. So kind of an interesting little device, and had fun working on that review. And then next week, we're going to do a review of cheap lavalier microphones. Not a single one, but a comparison of several that record to your mobile phone. Those, we seem to be getting a lot of interest in those. So last week I had reviewed the one from Gora. What we'll do is we'll take that one versus the Rode SmartLav Plus versus the Aperture A-Lav, which are three that I've looked at. They were kind of the most positive experience I had with those types of microphones. So we'll just do a little audio comparison of those three and see how that pans out. Just because a lot of people seem to have interest in those. And frankly, those are pretty good tools. I'm actually really impressed. If I'm recording directly to my phone, that Gora lavalier, it's like $20, $25 US. And actually, I understand for those that are not in the United States, you can now buy it at the Amazon.com US site and have it shipped internationally. And I'm not real clear on what the international shipping is. Hopefully it's not too much because it's just a very small package. But that's a pretty nice little mic. I'm really impressed with its overall sound coming straight out of the phone. And also its noise performance is quite impressive as well. So great little option there. So thank you to everyone that joined the session live today. Again, thank Art Johnson for your question. And go ahead and submit those for next week as we get the next session up. Thanks again, everybody, and we'll talk to you again next week.